Welcome back to an all-new edition of the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. Ryan Snyder, Greg Pickel joining you in this mid-February Tuesday afternoon. Ryan, it's the saddest Tuesday podcast we do every year because it's the first one after football is officially over at the college and the professional level. Obviously, we'll get into spring practice here in a bit, but no games for quite some time. Two former Penn State players, Grant Haley and Nick Scott, of course, winning the Super Bowl with the Los Angeles Rams on Sunday over the Cincinnati Bengals. Those two guys, I think Penn State fans really appreciate their career. And, you know, it's funny, I wrote on Tuesday morning, and I'll see what your thought on this is, but if you, in 2014, okay, when the 2014 class signed at Penn State, if you would have made everyone pick two players from that class who would one day be standing on the same Super Bowl winning stage together, if you're being honest with yourself, I'm not sure the picks would have been Grant Haley and Nick Scott, but it really shows how they developed at Penn State, brought a lot of skills and a lot of different versatility, you could say, to both the Nittany Lions and then in the NFL, and it ends with them, obviously doesn't end, this season ends, though, with those two getting Super Bowl rings. Pretty cool.
Yeah, man, that was a good class, of course, with Gesicki, who's with the Dolphins now. Chris Godwin, of course, is crushing it down in Tampa. I'm trying to look over the class here real quick. Who else was in it? Oh, Troy Reeder was in that class. He of course, just won with the Rams as well. Is Troy Apke still in the NFL?
Last I looked, he was not. Or if he was in that phase where he was not. I'm sorry. He plays for the Commanders. That's right. I forgot about that.
Oh,
yeah.
The Commanders.
The Commanders.
Used to that.
Yeah.
That was a pretty good class, man. Jason Cabinda, Amani Oruwariye.
Well, then Jason Cabinda, who would have thought he'd stick in the league as a fullback of all things?
I love Jason Cabinda as a recruit, man. He was such a good guy, and like he got offered for Penn State a little later in the process, and like I just remember throughout the whole process, he was always kind of asking me like, hey, have you heard anything about Penn State? Like they're interested in me and stuff, and I'm really happy for the way his career ran out because he was a good guy from the very start. And, of course, wasn't he up for one of the awards this year, like Humanitarian Award or something like
Walter
that?
Payton Man of the Year, yep.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So it's fitting. But, yeah, man, happy for Grant, happy for Nick, and happy for Troy Reeder, too. Man, his family was great to me back in the day as well. Nick, man, I don't know. I'd like to go back and watch Nick's Super Bowl a little bit better. I mean, there were some mistakes. You're always going to make mistakes as a defensive back in the NFL. But, his whole playoff really kind of he has 1 year left on his contract, and he's not making $1 million. So I'd be curious to see if, the way he performed in the last handful of games there, how it maybe helps him in a year from now when his contract's up. And, if he's able to parlay that into a move elsewhere or a bigger contract, because man, he certainly was excellent in the divisional round and the championship round, and made some decent plays in the Super Bowl too. But I'd be lying if I said I really watched the Super Bowl crazy close. I mean, I had the game on the whole time, but I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and it was just us at the house, man. So you're not watching every single play, unfortunately. But definitely happy for those guys, and it was a good year overall for the NFL. I thought, man, the playoffs were incredible.
They were, yes, and it was a good year for Penn State guys in the NFL. Not everyone, of course, had the season they wanted to. You mentioned Godwin. He was hurt at one point during the 2021 season, and some other guys maybe didn't have the year that was envisioned for them. But, yeah, so now we enter the long offseason of waiting for spring practice, of course, waiting for NFL training camps, and then, obviously, before we know it, football will be back. But it's over for now. Any final thoughts on just the Super Bowl, the NFL season it was, Penn State guys in the pros, what that means for recruiting, if anything? I guess let me just throw that at you right there, and maybe this is a question you can tackle in your mailbag later this week as well at bluewhiteillustrated.com. But there's no bump, I assume, for school when their former players win in the Super Bowl because there's so many schools represented, of course, in the Super Bowl? Or is that just a little bit of social media magic that, might not mean anything, might mean a little bit of something?
The Super Bowl has nothing to do with it. Micah Parsons' progression, yes, that's something that they can parlay into recruiting. I mean, no disrespect to Nick and Grant, but they're solid contributors to an awesome team and a great story. But I mean, how much have they pushed Saquon Barkley over the last handful of years,
right.
and now Micah Parsons is absolutely on that stage and arguably surpassing what Saquon has done. let's see how year 2 goes. There's always like a sophomore slump, I feel like. But man, with Micah, I don't know. His trajectory is absolutely incredible right now. So, I mean, Penn State's been pushing Micah Parsons on the recruiting trail for a couple years now, and that case of his development is only grown a lot stronger. So they'll continue that for sure, and looking forward to seeing how he progresses. The one other thing I would say, man, is I just really hope Godwin's able to come back from this ACL injury, man, because he was another guy who they talked about a good bit on the recruiting trail, and just another really classy guy, man. Chris was incredible to me and all of us on the Penn State beat when he was here. Just an awesome individual, and I really hope he's able to bounce back and have the kind of, I don't know if he's still going to be on that rocket path that he was. I mean, he was on pace to be. I mean, he was absolutely one of the best wide receivers in the NFL,
no question,
this year and last year. And when you have a major injury like that, it's we've seen the good and the bad from it, right? Some guys have returned and been all right, but a lot haven't. So hoping everything works out for Chris.
Yeah, 2 final thoughts there. One with Godwin. I believe he's coming into a contract. He's coming, his contract is up in Tampa Bay. So obviously that injury is going to probably impact what he gets in free agency, where he ends up. The Bucs have a ton of decisions to make, of course, with Tom Brady now retiring and everything else. So we'll see where he lands. But I get a weird feeling, Ryan, that someone's going to get him a little bit of under market value and get over market production from him, assuming he can come back and play even a little bit less than, but close to the level he was at, because he was just tremendous so many times this season and last season as well. And then with Micah, it's not just Penn State that's going to be pushing that now, buddy. It's going to be Virginia Tech too. I know they can't push it the same exact way, but I have a strong sense that Brent Pry is going to find a way to work that into his recruiting pitch in Blacksburg with linebackers and other guys on defense.
Yeah. Was Chris Godwin the number 1 receiver for free agents? Like, I'm trying to think of who. I think Devontae Adams is a free agent this year.
Yep.
I want to say, Allen Robinson's a free agent too. And, of course, Beckham, who also just got hurt. I think I'm missing somebody else. Maybe Mike Williams, I want to say. But either way, Chris was going to be, the hottest name for free agency, aside from probably Devontae Adams. But just curious to see where he ends up, man. I mean, he I don't know if he was getting like a $20 million a year kind of contract, but I mean, he was on pace for like $15 million or more probably per season. So I'm hoping he's able to get that because he deserves it.
Yeah, so ESPN is just out with their free agent rankings today, Tuesday, February 15th. They have him as the 3rd receiver in free agency behind those 2 guys you mentioned, Mike Williams and Devontae Adams, but number 4 overall, regardless of position. So he's going to get paid. If I had to guess, he'll stick in Tampa. I think he seems to like it there. Obviously, he's going to have to think about
Who wouldn't?
Yeah, right. It was a pretty good time down there for the bowl game. So we'll see. He has to decide, what the quarterback outlook there is going to be, of course, because if you make a lot of money but the quarterback can't throw you the ball, it doesn't really – that's not really the marriage of the best things you could possibly have as a player with his talent. So we'll see, but that was NFL talk here on the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. Ryan Snyder, Greg Pickel kicking it around here in mid-February during yet another NCAA dead period. Recruits cannot visit campus, as we talked about last week. And if you missed Ryan and T. Frank breaking down the recruiting calendar on the BWI Daily Show last week, find that wherever you get your podcast. Of course, if you're listening to that, you know where to do it already, or also at youtube.com/Blue White Illustrated. So let's move on here. You had a story, a premium story up at bluewhiteillustrated.com on Tuesday morning. Phil, I'm going to butcher it. You'll fix it for me. Picciotti. Yes, there we go. The very talented linebacker out of Pennridge High School, same one as Nick Tarburton, of course, in Pennsylvania, has kind of set his visit plan. We'll get into a couple of those, not all of them. You can find the full story for just $1 for 1 year of access to On3 and Blue White Illustrated on our homepage. You can check that out. Get signed up for 1 year for 365 days of access to insider recruiting notes, just like this one and much more. Ryan, what's the outlook with him at this point? Penn State clearly likes him as one of its upper tier, I would say, targets on defense in this cycle, but it is by no means, even though he's a PA kid, at least from the outside looking in from this point of view, a slam dunk that it's going to be all Penn State all the way here. You get the sense it might end up that way one day, but he's going to do his due diligence here over the next month or so.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a pick in for him. I put it in kind of when we were transitioning and getting the RPM going, basically bosses said put some picks in so we can play with our algorithm, and he was one that I logged before Brent Pry moved, and that was a big thing that I'll note is, I'm not saying Manny Diaz has done a negative or poor job with him so far, but I think he just needs to still get to know Manny,
right,
because he has not visited Penn State since that coaching change took place. So that's going to be a big thing coming up here. I'm not going to share all 6 of his visits right now. Like I said, we have a great $1 deal. We want you guys to sign up for it. I will note that he's coming to Penn State in mid-April, and it's going to be a huge visit for the whole staff, for his family. You know, he decided not, Picciotti, excuse me, his family decided not to take junior day visits in January. And I think it was actually a smart move, because they want the one-on-one, you know, kind of come up for spring practice, have, you know, if you're not the only recruit on campus, you're going to be one of like 3, right. And really just kind of have a true one-on-one kind of day with the coaching staff. And that's what they're aiming to do here. Come up, watch spring practice. It'll be before the blue-white game, but not long before it. I'll share the date. It's April 15th for that visit. So, you know, we'll see how that goes. I think that's going to be an incredibly important visit, though, and it's all about Manny Diaz and getting to know him more. Penn State's in regular contact with him, but, you know, when you spend a day, you know, go get lunch, you know, sit in the film room, right. There's so much more you can take out of those kind of visits. So the big thing I'll share with Picciotti is that Notre Dame is not one of the 6 visits he has set. And you know, there is a lot of talk about the Irish being on him heavy, and that seems to be cooling. And you know, they do have 2 linebackers committed. And if you look at Preston Zinter's game, and you look at Phil Picciotti's game, Preston Zinter, of course, was a recruit Penn State was after, and he just committed to Notre Dame this past Friday. So when you kind of compare them a little bit, it would kind of make sense that you know, for the 3rd linebacker that they take, maybe they're looking for, you know, more of a rangy linebacker, you know, somebody who because I mean, Picciotti is going to be a true Mike, at least in my opinion. At least he will be. So I don't know Notre Dame's complete situation, but I do know that it's you know, the Irish seem to be looking elsewhere at the moment. There's a little bit of contact, but not nearly as much as there was a couple weeks ago. And that was the team that a lot of people thought was going to push Penn State. So Michigan and Michigan State are very much in the mix, and they will receive visits. You guys can figure that out. You know, the visits will be out there at some point, but they're going to get some visits. Oklahoma's also in the mix, so and a few other schools. So we'll see how it plays out. But not having Notre Dame in there, I think, will be important for Penn State moving forward, because they were definitely in the mix.
Gut reaction: does the Al Golden defensive coordinator hire at Notre Dame mean that could possibly change down the road?
I don't think so, because this doesn't look like they were on him hard enough because they liked him as a player, and I still think they like him as a player. This looks more like a positional thing to me, where, you know, they have 2 linebackers committed. I don't know enough about Drake Bowen. I mean, I know he's an awesome player. I don't know exactly where he projects and how that would line up with Picciotti. And you know, I haven't watched a ton of Preston Zinter, but I do see some similarities from what I have seen over the 2, comparing the 2. So it just looks more like hey, we got our Mike, we need a Will kind of situation. And, you know, Penn State will be in that same boat probably in a couple months from now once they get a linebacker or 2 committed. So I would think no, but that was an interesting hire for Notre Dame. I'll be curious to see how Al Golden does.
Yeah, I will be too. Obviously, I know Penn State fans some of them anyway, have long hoped that he would maybe lead Penn State at some point or another, or join the staff at some point or another. Not in the cards, obviously, at the moment. Yeah, but we'll see. I'll be completely honest with you. I had no idea he was with the Cincinnati Bengals. Not the slightest bit of a clue until the report started kind of coming out that as the Super Bowl was coming to its point of being played, that, you know, he was a candidate for that job. And clearly Notre Dame felt pretty good, I would assume, about where the direction of that was going to go, because they waited as long as they did to hire a defensive coordinator. So we'll see. I mean, it's an interesting staff out there at Notre Dame. They're very active on social media from what I've been able to tell. And not that that has really anything to do with Al Golden, but, you know, certainly I think it'll have a different they'll have a different approach, certainly, under Marcus Freeman than what they did under Brian Kelly, and we'll see how that does and does not impact Penn State moving forward.
I was trying to look up Al Golden on Twitter, but you ended too quick to see if he was active.
Well, I'll say this real quick. While you do that, Picciotti. We'll get it right one of these days. I promise, Picciotti family. On 3 has him a little bit higher than the consensus. We have him as a 4-star. The consensus has a 3-star. Like you said, there's a lot of schools.
He was
in
a
the
4-star. Let me cut you off. He was a 4-star in the consensus, and then there's been a lot of shuffling going on. Like, he's right there on the bubble. Like, I'd be very, very surprised if Picciotti is not a 4-star. After spring season, into the summer, into the season, like in the consensus.
Right.
But we love him. We know he's going to be a 4-star for on 3. I don't see that changing. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of shuffling going on with Rivals updating their rankings and 247, and of course the ESPN's in the mix there too. And they're all, for everyone learning the consensus, they're all 25% equally weighted. There's no lean towards on 3, which is the difference between the 247 composite, where it's slanted towards 247, and then Rivals and ESPN have a say, but not as much. So that's just the difference between our 2 rankings. But yeah, we'll see what happens there for sure.
Really talented player. We'll see where he ends up. Like you said, he's close to breaking through to that 4-star point on the on 3 consensus. I'm looking right now. We have him at 368 overall in the consensus. That's that's in the 3-star range at this point. The 4-star though, the last 4-star is 349. So he's not far off from that at all.
Right there.
Yeah, and we'll see if that moves along moving forward. This is the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel. We are moving on from high school players to the transfer portal. Obviously, Penn State fans, college football fans love the transfer portal, hate the transfer portal, want more out of the transfer portal. Ryan hates the transfer portal.
I don't
it's just it's interesting. I think, let me just a brief aside here before we get into a couple of names to know, is that from our perspective, it's just the guys in the portal just don't have the same incentive. I don't know if incentive is the right word, but certainly interest in kind of talking about the process until it's over for the most part. They've been there, done that. They don't see the need for it. So you have some guys who do want to be very active on social media with putting out offers and visits and things like that. It's very few of them compared to the high school recruiting cycle, obviously. And, a guy like Hunter Norzad will confirm some things here or there. The new most recent Penn State commit will confirm some things from time to time. But I go back to Christmas Eve and Mitchell Tinsley. And him just saying, I'm going to Penn State. You can put it out there if you want. You don't have to. If you do, that's fine. And obviously with high school kids, we have ceremonies and Twitter graphics and all this other stuff, broadcast of it. And it's just not that way in the portal. So that's kind of one of the reasons that it sometimes can be challenging when, there's a question that's asked of, hey, does Penn State want to go get this guy? Does Penn State want to go get that guy? And 9 times out of 10, the answer might be, yeah, sure. But does a kid have any interest? That's where it becomes more challenging to get a read at times. So let's talk about one guy that, again, does not have an offer from Penn State as we talk on Tuesday, February 15. Cole Spencer. Penn State already has one Western Kentucky transfer in Mitchell Tinsley. Cole Spencer is also a Western Kentucky player who's looking to move up to the FBS level. He is in the transfer portal as of Monday on 3 senior national
the Power
college.
5 level.
The Power 5 level,
Power
yes,
5.
correct.
Yep,
correct.
I did.
Yep. I actually wrote that in the story that we have up this morning at BWI, and then I had to fix that when I woke up. That happens from time to time. You look at something, you say, oh, that's not right. So apologies about that. But to the Power 5 level from the group of 5. We'll see if he's a guy that is going to be active on social media based on my scroll of his feed recently. I'm thinking that answer is going to be no, but time will tell. Anyway, again, as we sit here, he does not have a Penn State offer yet, but
do we know that though? We don't know that.
Well, that's true. We don't know that. That's correct.
I think
what I can tell you is that Phil Troutline and Dan Cabala followed him on social media with very little time wasted. So, I'm sure Penn State's working on if they have not already made contact. And it's certainly a possibility.
I think they're going to go after him. I would lean towards he probably is. If he doesn't have an offer, he's going to get an offer. Not that a couple follows mean anything, but just when you look at his history, first off, he seems he's like all academic, grad transfer. Like there's a lot of little things there to think like, okay, this makes sense for Penn State, And then he's also just a hell of a player too. I mean, just look at his PFF rankings, man. Like he racked. I mean, he was. I forget. I don't have it in front of me. I apologize, but I think pass blocking or run blocking, one of those two. He was like top 10 in the country. So there's some indications there that he's a pretty good player, and of course that doesn't mean he's going to come up to the Power 5 level. I almost said FBS there, to the Power 5 level and be a stud. But Penn State's definitely clearly interested there. But I mean, just if you're just following, Twitter follows and stuff. I mean, there's a lot of schools from Auburn, Utah, Virginia Tech, Rutgers, NC State, Mississippi State, Kentucky, Tennessee, Florida State. I mean, there's a lot of schools already just boom on him instantly. So, this is why I meant this jokingly. I do actually like the portal. I think it's good for the players. I mean, I know it's frustrating the fans, but if a coach is allowed to move around, I don't see why the players, especially if you're not going to pay the players, why they shouldn't be given the same opportunity.
Right.
But just from a journalist perspective and trying to follow it, it's just difficult because I think we do a good job providing answers for high school kids, and I'm able to figure them out for the most part. But it's so much more difficult to follow a grad transfer's decision, and it's so quick too. They're usually just a couple weeks. Now, this one, of course, with him entering now, he won't be able to enroll until May or June or whatever school it is. So
right.
This one will drag out a little bit. But for the vast majority of those in that late November to early January time period, man, they just move so fast and there's so much movement. It's just hard to follow. So we'll see. This will be a guy that I asked Penn State about here in the coming days, and I'm sure I'll be able to get a feel for how hard Penn State's pursuing him. But right now, we just from following Twitter follows and stuff like that, there looks like a whole host of schools who have a lot of interest.
And why wouldn't there be? I mean, this is a guy who was an all-conference USA pick, a 3-year starter, I believe, and it would be a 4-year starter had he not suffered an injury at one point. I'm not sure if they're counting that year that he only played 3 games and actually took a red shirt because he was hurt in that or not. But at any rate, a multi-year starter. See, this is what we do, folks. We talk around things that we don't have exact answers to. He's a multi-year starter, Ryan. We don't know if it's 2 or 3 or 4, but it's a multi-year. At any rate, no. I mean, he's a guy that's played a lot of football at Western Kentucky. And this has been the way Penn State has, and again, we don't know where things stand at this point, but I think you put this on the message board recently. If you're hoping that Penn State's going to get involved with every FBS Power 5 transfer that pops up, you have not been following what goes on here, especially at the bigger schools. I mean, Derek Tangelo, Duke, John Lovett, Baylor, which I guess is, maybe a little bit bigger than, obviously you're talking about Arnold Ebiketie, rather, at Temple, Mitchell Tinsley, Western Kentucky, Hunter Norzad, Cornell, Eric Wilson, Harvard. I mean, these are not top necessarily in most cases, or in some cases not even possible to be top 25 programs. So this is certainly the path Penn State has taken more often than not. James Franklin talked about this a couple weeks ago, everyone. He was very direct about the fact that he was surprised more schools kind of don't, this is my words, not his, but it's what he was getting at, kind of the due diligence of going the extra mile to find out everything they can about a player and what he's going to bring to Penn State on the field, off the field, etc. They do a lot of work, and so they're not going to just dive in for every former 4-star or 5-star that goes into the portal. And again, usually there's a reason those guys are in there. So, I think that's important to keep in mind. However, I am going to talk about a guy now at another Power 5 program, or rather you're going to talk about him, Penn State. Penn State seems to maybe have some interest in a guy from another Big Ten school. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Raekwon O'Neal, offensive tackle from Rutgers. We'll see. Basically, from what I gathered here is that there's interest. Penn State has interest in him. He's a native of South Carolina, and there's a lot of talk that he kind of wants to go south. So that's I'm not very optimistic about it, but I do think it's worth mentioning that they are absolutely pursuing him. I do believe that he has an offer from Penn State or whatever that means. In the transfer portal era, I guess you'd say, but. We'll see. I think they want to get him on campus in March. I talked about Tyler Steen last week for Vanderbilt. I do think they are going to get Tyler Steen on campus for a visit in March, once the dead period ends, of course. And, that's just something to keep an eye on. I was talking to some Penn State people last night about, and this was just general, not necessarily transfers, but about what their March visit schedule will look like. And one thing I wasn't thinking of is spring break is March 5th to the 13th for Penn State. So those 2 weekends are pretty much obsolete. Penn State's coaches usually go away. Campus is kind of shut down. I think those first 2 weekends are going to be pretty light. But then when we get to what is it? The 26th, I believe. The 26th is going to be a huge weekend from what I've gathered. That's also Chalk Talk weekend, which is like when a bunch of coaches come up,
right,
to do their, I think it's like a coaching seminar basically. And usually they bring some players with them. So that 26th weekend is definitely gonna be a big weekend. Is it 26? Is that the weekend? I don't know if you have a calendar for me. I think it's
I
26.
believe it is. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm sure the 19th will be busy too. We know Penn State's going to get spring practice started around then. But yeah, these are three guys we're looking for. Three offensive linemen we're looking for: Raekwon O'Neal, Cole Spencer, and Tyler Steen. And if Penn State can add another tackle or really just another offensive lineman, they certainly will. So we're still trying to get a better feel for Cam Butler out of Miami, Ohio. I've reached out a couple times, haven't had much luck. And of course, then the Murphy twins out of North Texas, similar situation. I just keep hearing that they're communicating with Penn State, but anything beyond that, it's been tough to really get some information on. So time will tell. We'll continue to chip away best we can.
Absolutely. And so at this point, as you mentioned, it is important to note that when you're talking about the transfer portal at this moment in time, there's no real rush for these guys, right? I mean, they certainly want to set up visits. I'm sure from a mental, just from a life standpoint, they would certainly probably like to know where they're going sooner rather than later, but there's no rush to make that decision whatsoever. These guys are at a point where they can't enroll with the school of their choice until May at best, unless they have some kind of unique setup at a certain school, which I don't think anyone really does. So time will tell. Yeah. But Penn State
one thing I was going to say quickly, Greg, I'm sorry to cut you off, but unless they already have their school picked out for them, which is happening a good bit in the portal. Now, when I look at all the schools following Cole Spencer, that tells me he probably doesn't, because if they'd be able to figure that pretty quickly by just calling around and talking to some people. But, that's just another thing where, we know that's not the case with Steen. I'm not sure for Raekwon O'Neal. I mean, I've heard a lot of talk with O'Neal about Florida State. So, whether he's actually alluding there or that's kind of just a matter of time, we'll see. But that's just another thing. We've talked about that in previous podcasts. That's another thing we're seeing a lot is guys already kind of knowing where they're going. So just something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's important to note that technically players cannot communicate with other schools until they're in the portal. Is that happening? I think you'd be naive to say that it certainly is. But the other thing is, again, you have to remember that 7-on-7 coaches, high school coaches, uncles, moms, dads, aunts, whoever, they can pretty much do as they see fit. There's no restrictions on them. At least as far as the rule book reads. So, that's how these things can happen a lot quicker than what most would expect, and also how it can seem like a guy who went into the portal magically knows where he's going almost immediately. There was obviously some things going on behind the scenes. All right, one more topic here as we get toward the final few minutes here of the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast is something you addressed in your mailbag last week, and that is the surge of offers for Penn State in recent cycles. So let's talk a little bit about that and maybe get into some of the different offers that are out there, because not every offer you see on social media is equal.
No, they certainly are not. I mean, especially in the last couple of years, we've really just seen a different approach from Penn State and the way they used to hand out offers and what their offer meant. I'll say this, basically every kid that gets an offer from Penn State, there's stipulations on that offer. It's never just hey, you have a scholarship, you can commit tomorrow. There's some kids like that, yes, but for the most part, that's not how it works. And it's usually just contingent on progression as a person and as a player. And they a lot of guys, they'll say, hey, look, we want to offer you, but we want to see you also hit X, Y, and Z. In the coming months, whether it's academically, whether it's, progression as a player, whatever it may be, that there's a lot of those stipulations. And that's why you can hand out 300 offers like they did in 2021. And dude, they handed out 360 plus offers in 2022, which is on just an absolutely different level from anything we really saw in previous years. So I just got asked about what that means, why that's happening. And for the most part, what I've just been able to gather is that what does a verbal offer mean anymore? It means very little.
An invitation to campus, basically, for most.
There was a point, and there are schools who still do this, right? There are schools who like Clemson. Clemson's the
I was
best
gonna say
example.
Clemson's the easy example in this conversation. Yeah.
I'll give a shout out to my buddy here, Blair Sanders, and he works for Rivals. He works for Iowa, and he's been a good friend of mine for the longest time. And Blair put out a tweet last week looking at all the offers in the Rivals database, and I'll want to give him credit for it because that's what I'm looking at here. Clemson right now, according to this, which just was like about a week ago, Clemson has handed out 55 offers, okay, for 2023. Penn State is at 265. Okay, so you're seeing that because they're different mentalities of what they're pitching to kids. So with Clemson, it's, hey man, when we offer you, this offer means something. Okay, like this is a true offer. We're not going to go offer the next guy on our board at this position until we get a better feel for where you stand. And that was the approach Penn State took for the longest time. And in 2019, 2020, obviously I'm not privy to what those discussions were or what happened, but it's very clear that something massively changed in the way they go about it. And just from what I have gathered, it is just kind of, I think that they felt that they were offering guys too late in the process by taking that approach. When you're not Clemson, respectfully, Penn State's not on the level. Clemson had a poor year this year, but Clemson's still a bigger name to a lot of these kids at the moment. You need to get in on these guys early, and whether your offer means something or not, for a lot of teenagers, that doesn't matter.
Right.
So really, just what we're seeing here is them say, hey, look, let's throw out offers to guys that maybe we haven't even fully evaluated yet. But, to say they have an offer and to kickstart that relationship is more valuable to us than offering him 4 or 5 months later and then being in a dogfight just to get a visit. So
right.
I think that's really just kind of the main change that we've seen from Penn State. I mean, I'm looking back over the years. I mean, 2023, we're up to like 268 now, which, I mean, I think this is going to end up being the biggest, the most offers they've ever handed out. They're on pace for like 400 in this class. The last class is 367, and this is according to 247's database. 304 for 2021, 264 for 2020, and 197 in 2019. And if you go back to 2018 and 2014, they were all under 200. So we're really just seeing a massive change there from that 2020 class on. And like I said, man, I think it's just a mentality of, hey, man, we're waiting too long to get on these kids. We need to get them on campus, or at least give them a reason to want to come to our campus in the spring or earlier. So I just thought it was an interesting question, someone brought up, and it's something I've looked at for a long time now, and tried to figure out why that happened. So I tried to ask some questions about it, and those are kind of the answers I came back to. Now, real quick before I end this, I do want to go back to Blair Sanderson's tweet the other day on some of the other schools who are kind of taking a similar path. I mean, West Virginia right now in 2023 has offered 347 kids. That's like the same as Penn State's entire last class last time. So they're clearly taking that approach. Tennessee's at 313, Mississippi's at 304. Pitt's taking a similar approach with 295. Then you have Georgia Tech, Arizona State, Florida State, Arkansas, and Michigan State rounding out the top 10, and they're all between 262 and basically like 250 offers. And then you have schools like Northwestern, Clemson, Iowa, Stanford. I mean, they all make sense, right? Some good academic schools there, along with Iowa and Clemson is two teams that really, when they offer you, they want you to think you mean something. Those are all under 64, and then you got a ton of schools there in the hundreds. But I just think it's an interesting discussion on these different mentalities, these different mindsets that coaches take on what a verbal offer means now. And Penn State has clearly taken the approach of, hey, man, a verbal offer doesn't mean much. Let's get a foot in the door with these kids, get them on campus, and then we'll go from there.
If you have a question for Ryan Snyder's weekly Penn State recruiting mailbag, you can hit him up. You can see his Twitter feed linked if you're watching the video. If you're not, if you're on the podcast, it's at Ryan Snyder on 3. Send him something Wednesday, Thursday. You'll take him any day of the week, I believe, as long as you can
Pretty
get.
Much. I've been keeping him mainly to the message, because our boss is the one that's putting it behind the paywall now. Obviously, we're trying to do the $1 deal, so I haven't been asking many people on Twitter lately, just because I feel bad doing that. Like personally, I don't know. I think our boss is kind of we doing that, if we're being honest. But just me, I feel bad saying, "Hey, all you Twitter people, give me your questions," And then, oh, by the way, I'm going to put it behind a paywall. And I understand, that's the sell, but I also just I don't like tricking people. So it's just how I am. But I am going to open it back up for free here when we get a little bit closer to spring ball. So we will discuss it more then. But for right now, it is behind the paywall. So I just want to clarify that.
All right, we'll sign up for Blue White Illustrated. $1 for 1 year of access. You can find that at our homepage, bluewhiteillustrated.com. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel. You've listened to another edition of the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast. We'll catch you next week. Same time, same place. Thanks for listening.